Esquire, Pairs Review, New York Times, and Best American Short Stories. And a small fact, after selling his TV to buy his first skateboard almost 40 years ago, Bret eventually became a professional skateboarder and has written many essays as well as that documentary about the sport. In fact, just a small 1-minute story here. Though we hosted Bret years ago, and he made such an impression on students and faculty that we couldn't wait to get him back to Iowa, where he once spent many years as a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Luckily, with the release of his latest novel, he returned to his alma mater down the road in Iowa City, had a reading at Prairie Lights last night, and he contacted me and he was like, I'll be in town, so why don't I swing by the old DMAC again? And we were thrilled, and we offered him money, hotels, airfare, whatever he wanted to come on by, and he refused everything. Instead, he said, why don't you buy a bunch of copies of my book and give them to everybody for free? And that's what we're doing today. So, the second thing he requested, and this was pretty much non-negotiable from him, was that he had to check out Des Moines Skate Park down the road. Which, did you know that it's the biggest skate park in the country?
Yes.
I did not know this until Bret told me, and so we're going to go down there after the reading. Anyway, he has yet to outgrow his skateboarding, and he is also now, after directing the creative writing program at Harvard for over a decade, currently the director of the Michener Center for Writers at the University of Texas at Austin. But today, this morning, he's here with us. So let's welcome Bret to the stage.
Thank you, Mark. Michael, is this working? My phone. It's good. You guys in the back, you can hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Thank you all for coming. There's way too many of you, so I'm already incredibly nervous. And usually what you do when you do an event like this is you try to pick out the part of the book that you can read that's going to sell a lot of books, but because you're getting them for free, I don't really have to do that. And so there's two things that I want to say. I want to say thank you for coming. I want to thank Mark for inviting me. If you don't know, Mark has his first collection of stories coming out any day now. So all of you who are here, you need to go and get his book, and you need to buy that one instead of getting it for free. So I want to say that. The other thing I want to say is that I've got this microphone on that's clipped to my shirt. And every time that I'm in a situation where one of those is clipped to my shirt, I think of a story. And the story, I don't know if I've ever told this to you, Mark, but there was a very, very famous writer, a female, very, very famous writer. You have probably read her work. You have probably seen TV shows that were made out of her work. And she was invited back to her alma mater to talk like this. And they clipped one of these microphones to her, and she was doing this song and dance the way I'm doing it. And everything was going great, and she realized that she had gotten very, very, very nervous. And she was so nervous that she was going to throw up. And I'm telling you right now that if I get so nervous up here that I'm going to throw up, it's not going to go well for any of us. But she has more composure than I did, and she figured a way out of it. And it's that she told a little white lie, and she said, I'm so sorry. I realized that I've forgotten what I was going to read. I forgot it in my car. So if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna run outside, and I'm gonna get what I'm gonna read, and I'm gonna come back. And so they were like, oh yes, absolutely, famous female novelist, go, do that, we will wait. And so she went outside of the auditorium, and she went into the bathroom, and she started just throwing up everything that she'd eaten for the last 24 hours. She forgot that she had this microphone attached to her. And so everybody in the auditorium was hearing this famous female novelist throw up in the bathroom. And it was broadcast. And so my feeling, anytime we have a mic like this on me, is if it just goes a little better than that, then we're off to a great start. So thank you for coming. I'm going to read a lot less than I originally anticipated because I want to make sure that we have time to talk about what you're interested in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read 2 pages. And they're early in the book, so you don't really need to know anything. This is from a young man, a 14-year-old boy named Roy. In those raw first weeks of 1993, before my family broke apart and before the March fires, before the world turned its lurid attention our way, and before her, and before everything else that changed me, I was 14 years old and learning how to pick locks. I could open car doors with wire hangers, school lockers with a pocket knife, and almost anything else with tools my brother had sent me. Mason had been an infantry corporal in the Marines, but he had stayed in Iraq after the war to work as a contractor. He had just turned 21. We hadn't seen him in years, and although he was supposed to return home in the fall, I couldn't stop myself from imagining a future without him. Occasionally, when I struggled with a difficult lock, I would pretend Mason was trapped on the other side of the door and his safety depended on my opening it in time. Sometimes I saved him. Sometimes not. My parents didn't know about Mason's tools or the pillowcase full of locks under my bed or the hours I spent picking when I should have been sleeping or studying. My mother was a hospice nurse then, and my father was the high sheriff of McLennan County. Their minds were on graver subjects. At supper, one of us would say grace, and then we would tell a little bit about our days. Hers tending to the infirm, and his at the sheriff's office, and mine at school. We were not a family of bean spillers or bucket mouths. We curated our lives, gave each other wide berths. They knew Rosie had dumped me over Christmas vacation, but not that I had stopped catching the bus from school to avoid seeing Isaac on her lap the whole time. And I knew my parents, who claimed not to smoke, shared cigarettes in the backyard when something rattled them at their jobs or with Mason. But none of that came up at the table. We just listened to the sounds of our forks and knives, our glasses being lifted and put down. We asked each other to pass the fried okra or the jar of tartar sauce. We said how good it would be when Mason came home, speculated on what he would want to eat and do first. We made plans for the happier times ahead. This was how innocent we were, how gullible. This was Waco. And so the book is basically told from 2 points of view. One is from Roy, who you've just heard of, and the other is from a girl about his same age named Jay. And this is the first time that we meet Jay, and then it's all up to you. How the rest of this hour goes is entirely up to what you want to talk about. My mother was not religious. She was not a seeker or spiritual or even especially curious. She was a cleaning lady married to a man who threw a morning paper route for a living. When she came home at night, he was just waking up. In the summer of 1992, when I was about to enter high school, her boss paid her $100 to spend a weekend prepping a rental property for a new tenant coming in from Texas. The house was just outside Highland, California, in the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains. One wall was a giant mirror marbled with gold veins. The shower was glass bricks. The house had a sunken living room, too much carpet, and too little light. My mother offered me $20 to scrub tile and polish the windows. The tenant pulled in just before lunchtime on Sunday afternoon, a full day ahead of schedule. Perry Cullen was reedy and he talked with a twang. He wore a sweat-soaked tank top and amber-tinted glasses. He had 2 grease-blotted sacks of burgers like he had planned to bring us food all along. He asked if we would mind if he prayed before eating, which seemed a little weird, but also polite. Then the 3 of us ate on the cool grass, small-talking and listening to tales of Perry's travels. To anyone driving by, we were a family picnicking in the yard of our new house. After lunch, Perry helped us clean, and we loaded all the garbage into the bed of his old truck. Then he strummed some songs on his acoustic guitar. In the beginning, he was a man who arrived early and could carry a tune. A man who brought food and picked up after himself and paid attention. My mother never stood a chance. All right, now it's all on you.
Here, and Bret can field any manner of questions. I might start us off, though, just to kind of kick off the questions. So you're writing from like a historical perspective, I guess, even though it was a couple decades ago. I'm curious about how, but it's a fictionalized version of the events. So
Right.
I want to talk about like why you wanted to write about this event, maybe, as well as how do you negotiate like facts and fiction when you're in the writing process.
Yeah, there's a quote from the writer E.L. Doctorow, who was a very famous novelist. He won the Pulitzer Prize, and he wrote a lot of historical fiction. And what he said was that the historian will tell you what happened. The novelist will tell you how it felt. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to imagine what would this feel like, and if the facts of history weren't helpful in that, I just changed them. I mean, I just didn't really care. Which might not be good for you guys in your classes. It might get you a bad grade, but no one is grading me. So if I didn't like it, I just changed it.
Did you ever have a question yourself about whether you should change it or not, or did you wrestle with it at all, or you're just like,
Well, there's so much that's been written about what actually happened in Waco. The trouble that I had was not worrying about what to change, but finding a way into the story that hadn't been explored, because there's so much out there about David Koresh and the fires of Waco that it's hard to find a crack to use the imagination. So anytime I did that, I felt liberated. Yeah.
All right, who else has a question? Oh, in the back.
Yes, ma'am.
What was your publishing process?
My publishing process was, I sold this book about 10 years ago, and they said, we love this. This is going to be great. You're an amazing writer. Can you get it to us? Can you finish the book in a year? And I said, absolutely I can, knowing there was no way I could finish it in a year. And so for about the last 9 years, they would check in and say, is the book ready? And I would say, it's super close, guys. And then a year would go by, and it was that. So it was me just missing deadlines. That's how it was for me. But I mean, the way I think about it is that the publisher is going to publish hundreds of books in a year. And so if a number of those aren't any good, it's very easy for the publisher to absorb that. But I'm only going to publish a few books in my lifetime. And so if they're not good, I have to live with it. It's very easy for the publisher to live with it because they're going to publish 99 other books, and as long as a few of those are good, they're fine. If I publish a bad book, if I haven't worked hard enough on it, or if I rush it, I don't know that I can live with that. And so it was more important for me to do the best job that I could than to meet a deadline. And they didn't really like that, but too bad.
So can I do a follow-up?
Yeah.
It took 9 years. Why did it take 9 years? What kept pushing back the deadline for you as a writer?
Okay, that's kind of rude, Mark. And just to be clear, it took 10 years. But I also learned a handful of very mediocre skateboard tricks in that same decade. So I had my hands full. I think the real answer is that I'm an incredibly slow writer, and I find writing to be the most difficult thing that I've ever chosen to do, and that's not to. And I think it's probably if however many of us are in here are writers, I think that's also true for you. I think that we're all going to go through more difficult things in our lives, but we're not going to choose to go through those. We're gonna get sick. The people we love are going to get sick. We're going to have money trouble. We're going to have job trouble, but we're not going to choose those problems. We're choosing to write, and it's the hardest thing that we will ever choose to do, and it's the one thing in our lives that the longer you do it, the harder it gets. Because like, if you think of anything else that you've learned to do in your life, it was really difficult at first, and then it got easier. Like, for instance, walking. Like, when you were learning to walk, you fell on your face all the time. Now you probably don't fall on your face too often. You've gotten better at it. Writing feels really easy at the beginning, and then it gets harder and harder and harder the longer you do it. If I have if I've been given any gifts as a writer, it's that I've never expected this to be easy, and I've never expected it to be fast. And so when it's hard and slow, I'm okay. I don't freak out because I've never expected it to be anything else. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So eventually when the 10 years came by and you looked at the book, what made you decide that it was ready? Because you could keep working on it forever.
Yeah. I'm a writer. I write for the same reason that I read. And the easiest way to sum that up is to say that I want to be surprised. And so if I read something you've written, or if I read something Mark's written, anything that I read, I want to be surprised. And it's the same thing as a writer. I want the story to surprise me. And the way that I knew this was done is I felt like I had reached the end of the surprises. And this book, it surprised me again and again and again. But once I got to the final surprise, I knew that I had done everything that I could. And that doesn't mean that it's a good book, but it means that it's the best book that I could have written. Yeah. Yes, sir. You.
What's a story you want to write but haven't found your way to?
I've gotten really interested in, so I grew up on the Gulf Coast of South Texas, so on the Gulf of Mexico. And I've gotten really interested in the fishing and shrimping community on the Gulf Coast. And so I want to write something that takes place on a shrimp boat, but I can't find a shrimper to take me out yet. And so if anybody in here has any ties to the shrimping community, I would pay someone to take me out on a shrimp boat. That's what I want to do next. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes.
Does the book follow only those two characters, or do they follow anyone else?
There's a bunch of characters in the book, and so it follows these two characters through most of 1993, and then there's a whole other section of the book that kind of runs through it that takes place in 2024. And so you're following characters in 2024 as well. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. You guys are so, like, intimidating.
You are a creative writing teacher. What if one of your students particularly is a writer for fantasy and is struggling to end their story with finishing that final battle? How would you go about helping them out?
Can you say the first part of the question again?
You're a creative writing teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So what if one of your students who specializes in writing fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
how would you go about helping them figure out an ending to like their final battle?
Yeah. So yeah, sure. So I'm going to say a mistake. That's too strong of a term, but let's just use it. A mistake that a lot of emerging writers make is constantly reaching for something new. So when they're building up to that final battle, or even if it's a romance novel or a mystery novel or a historical novel, anything, a story, the emerging writer is constantly thinking like, okay, what can I add to this that I haven't done before, that I haven't used before? So you're going to go to a new land, or there's going to be some new kind of battle. And that can be fine, but it makes your life a lot harder. What more experienced writers do, someone who's been around the block a few times, me or Mark or any of the people that you read in your classes, George R.R. Martin, any of these people, our first move is usually not, what can I add to this story? Our first move is usually, what's already in the story that I can use again? And so it's not so much like, how do I make this final battle this new, huge new thing? It's sort of like, I have to have a final battle scene. What has already happened in the story that I can bring back that's going to give the reader a sense of closure and surprise, but also a feeling like this is where the story's been heading all along. So it's sort of like, instead of reaching for something new, reach for something that's in the first or middle part of the story and bring it back. That'll almost always work. Yeah. Yes, sir.
When you said that the book took you about 10 years to make, but I also heard a quote from you that talked about how you've been thinking about this book for like 30
Yeah.
years or so. During that 20 years before you started writing it, how did the book like evolve in your mind and like kind of just change its like perspective and what you wanted from it and what you were really looking for it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. I don't go into anything that I'm writing, whether it's a book or a sentence or anything in between. Like, I don't go to it feeling like, oh, this is what I want to say, or this is what I want the book to be. I go to it trying to figure out, what is this sentence or what is this book, what can I learn from it? So I kind of go in with questions more than answers. And so I think that first 20 years, I was trying to figure out what is a question about this subject that is going to withstand me spending 10 years with it. And I think that question was basically, what would you do for someone you love? And we're all going to have different answers for that, and the characters in the book have a different answer. But I think that's once I had that question, that's when I started writing, because I didn't know the answer to it for these characters. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I think that there might be some of my students in the room who don't know about Waco or David Koresh, and a twin question that I have with that is, are you thinking about the hostages in Gaza? Has your book made you think about that, and people re-entering, the parents and families missing their loved ones and not knowing? Also, I guess, what attracts you to people who have a calling that's a cult-like calling?
So in case you don't know, the very basic outline is that in 1993 there was a person who is often called a cult leader named David Koresh, and he had a compound about 20 miles outside of Waco, Texas, and he had about 100 or so people, many of them women and children, who lived on that compound and believed that he could predict the end of the world. And they believed that he was a prophet. He was probably up to no good with women and guns, but they didn't see him that way. They saw him as, this is a person who has read the Bible backwards and forwards, and he understands it in a way that makes sense to me. Then the United States government got wind of this, and they went in and tried to arrest him, but all of the community members at the ranch, they took up the guns and started having a shootout with the government. And then it resulted in the longest siege in American history on American soil. It lasted 51 days. And at the end of that 51 days, the ranch had been surrounded by tanks. The government decided to go in and kind of knock down the walls of the ranch with tanks. And no one really knows who started the fires, but the whole ranch went up in flames, and basically everybody inside died. No matter what you believe, no matter what side you're on, it's a complete tragedy. And I think that's entirely true of what's happening in Gaza in your question. The word hostage, you're very thoughtful to zero in on the word hostage. In terms of my book and what happened in Waco, hostage is a very interesting and important term, because the government accused they accused David Koresh of holding everybody hostage inside the compound. And David Koresh was saying, I'm not holding anybody hostage. The door is open. They can leave anytime they want to leave. That seems to be factually true. It seemed that anybody could leave if they wanted to, and some of them did. But what everybody inside the compound thought was, the United States government is holding us hostage because they have our house surrounded by tanks. We don't want to go outside because there are tanks pointed at us. So it becomes a very interesting word depending on what your sensibility is. In terms of what draws people to that kind of belief and why we're so interested in those stories, I think that answer is the same for both questions. And I think it's that we want someone to explain to us what is ultimately inexplicable. We believe that there is someone, whether it's a book, a documentary, a religious scholar, someone who claims to be a prophet, we want them to tell us the answer to something that is unanswerable. And until they do, we're going to keep coming back to those stories. We're going to keep coming back to different kinds of belief because we want to know. We want to know, and we want to be comforted by the idea that there's an answer out there. Yes, sir. What made me start writing? I heard, I always loved to read, but I never really understood that you could be a writer. But I heard that song by The Doors called Moonlight Drive, and the song is ultimately just about a couple of people driving around at night, but one of the lyrics is, let's climb through the tide, let's swim to the moon. And I was like, that doesn't sound like you're going for a drive. I didn't know you could describe a drive like that. And so I just kind of fell in love with language. And I've never fallen out of love with language. So ultimately, I just love words. Yeah. Yes.
So being this far in your career, do you have any practices that you still use or that you still teach?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do, what are they?
I've never been I don't really believe in inspiration. I think there's a lot of people who say like, oh, I'm going to write when I'm inspired. That just feels like a way not to do your job. And so I've always been someone who I just show up for work. I treat this like a job. And so I work a lot. And what that does for me is if I have a bad day at the office, if I have a bad day writing, it doesn't really matter because I know that I'm going to be there tomorrow. And I know that I'm going to be there the next day. And if I were someone who only wrote one day a week when I was quote unquote inspired, if that day doesn't go well, it sucks. And it's a lot of pressure on me. But if I'm working every day, chances are a couple of those days aren't going to be horrible, and that'll just carry me through until the next good day, you know? So I would say, like, my best advice is to treat this, even if you're doing it for class, is to treat it like a job, which is your job is to show up and do the work. Your job is not to ask if the work was good or bad. You know, like if you work at Dairy Queen, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. But just because you have a bad day doesn't mean you're not going to show up to work, because if you don't show up to work, you're not going to get paid. So I would say show up to work and eventually you're going to get paid. Yeah. Yes?
When writing historical fiction about recent history, how do you maintain respect for the real people affected?
That's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. And that was probably the thing that I worried about the most. I've been very heartened by people who have been happy with the way the book came out. But what I tried to do is I tried to imagine what would it be like to be in this situation and imagine that without any kind of judgment. And like going back to her question of like, I don't want you to read this book. I don't want anybody to read this book and feel like, oh, Bret's on this side of history, or Bret's on this side of history. What Bret believes doesn't matter at all. What matters are the people in the book, and as you say, the people who experienced it. There's a great quote. I believe it's from the German writer Goethe in the play Faust, and it's almost word for word. I've never heard of a crime that I couldn't imagine committing myself. And what I've always thought about is if there's a crime that I couldn't imagine committing myself, if there's an action, if there's an emotion that I can't imagine myself having, then I'm not the writer to write about it. Maybe you're the writer, maybe she's the writer, because you're going to be able to come at that without any kind of judgment. I don't want to feel any judgment. I want to feel a sense of curiosity as opposed to judgment. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You can agree with me that you enjoy skateboarding and that your skateboarding can at times have an influence on your writing.
I agree passionately with this, and I'm glad that we're finally talking about skateboarding.
Well, now we're going to start talking about something else.
Oh.
Is there anything else besides skateboarding that you think influences your writing? A hobby or anything else?
It's in terms of a hobby, it's pretty much only skateboarding. But in terms of things that are not hobbies, what has the most influence on my writing is my students, and my former teachers, and my peers and colleagues like Mark Dickinson. The people, students, colleagues, friends, former teachers who I hope appreciate what I'm trying to do, because I'm at the stage in my career where I'm very happy to get good reviews. I'm very happy for books to sell. All of that's wonderful. I hope it always happens. I hope I become a bajillionaire. At the end of the day, though, I really don't care as long as Mark likes what I write, as long as my former teachers like what I write, as long as I feel like I'm of service to my students. That's what has a profound influence on me.
Have you ever used any of your students or teachers in your books?
No. I mean, and this goes back to like your question about like things that I think about. There's and a lot of times people will ask writers or teachers of like, do I have the right to tell this story? Like, I heard my friend telling this thing that happened to him, and I think it would make a great story. Am I allowed to do that? The answer is probably yes. But what I've done is I always tell my students, and there's like 5 people in my life that I've said, you can tell me anything that you want, and I will never put it in a book. You matter more to me than writing. There's like, if we're not counting students, there's like 5 people on that list. Anybody else tells me anything, like, it's fair game. But I want the people that I love most in the world to feel like they can be open with me, and it's not going to wind up in a book. Anybody else, I mean, not you guys, because you're Mark's students and you're teacher's students, so you guys get a pass. But anybody else, like, if someone makes the mistake of going to dinner with me and they start telling me some horrible thing that's happening in their life, it's like, sorry, dude. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So you hear the term writer's block. Us as students can experience similar things in our day-to-day lives. Where do you find yourself when you want to recollect yourself, find motivation and creativity if you're feeling burnt out?
So there's a very easy way. Once you understand it, there's a very easy way to beat writer's block, or to beat any kind of feeling like feeling burnt out or any of that kind of stuff. And the way that you do it is you lower your standards. That's really what it comes down to. So you guys are all in school. You have these amazing teachers who care about you and who invited you to this event. Let's say that one of them assigns you an essay that is due in a month. When you get that assignment and it's due a month from now, what happens in your brain and in your guts and in your heart is you think, I've got a month. I can get an A on that. That's plenty of time. No problem. I'm going to get an A on that. And so you don't start writing. Then a week goes by, and you're thinking like, okay, I've still got 3 weeks. I can still totally get an A. Plenty of time. And you don't start writing. Now 2 weeks has gone by, and you're thinking like, okay, it's 2 weeks now. I've gotten kind of busy. Maybe I could still get an A, but 2 weeks I could definitely get like a B or a B plus. And you don't start writing. A week goes by, you've got a week left. Okay, now it's getting really tight. I've only got a week, I have to work, I've got my family. I might be able to get a B minus, but I could definitely get a C plus, and you don't start writing. And then it's the night before. And everybody thinks like, oh, I procrastinate. I wait to the last minute to do my work. But nobody asks why you procrastinate. You just think like that's a flaw in the system. But if it's the night before something is due, that's usually when you start work. Not because you procrastinate, but because you've lowered your standards, which is you're not worried about getting an A anymore. You're not worried about getting a B. You're not even really worried about getting a C. What you're thinking about is if I can turn in anything at all, if I can turn in anything, I won't get a 0, and then I can work harder the next time and I'll still save my GPA. When you're only worried about not getting a 0, that's when you start working. It's the same thing is true in any area of your life, whether you're an artist, a musician, a writer, an athlete, anything like that. If your standards are too high, If you're saying like, I have to win the gold medal, I have to do X and Y and Z, you're never going to do it. But if you lower your standards enough, you can start working. And once you start working, it's a lot easier to keep working than it is to have started. So the trick is to lower your standards and understand that that is actually not a bad thing. That is not a failing on your part. That is you giving yourself permission to do the work that you were meant to do. Yes?
So before you published for the first time,
Yeah.
what is advice that you wish had been given to you?
I wish someone would have told me, write the thing that you want to read. Because I feel like when you're just starting out, you're reading all this stuff, or you're coming to talks like this, you're going to your teachers, and you're reading all of these amazing people. You're reading Toni Morrison, you're reading Faulkner, you're reading George R.R. Martin, whoever is having an influence on you, and you think like, oh, okay, I need to do what they're doing. Really what you need to do is you need to write what only you can write. And that's usually going to be reflected in what is the book that you want to read, the story you want to read, the poem you want to read, the movie you want to see that doesn't exist. You have to give yourself permission to write that thing. And a lot of times once you do that, the world opens up. But yeah.
For me, I'm writing a memoir, so it is
Yeah.
something that only I can write.
Right.
But I don't know, it's just
What's the problem? You've got it.
well, the thing that I'm struggling with specifically is how much is too much information, like how because I want to give the reader a chance to experience
Mhm.
and learn as I learned, but I don't know what's too much information.
Yeah, and so we can solve this in 2 minutes. One thing is you need to find readers that are going to be honest with you, and they're not going to be hurtful, but they're going to be able to say like, this is too much information. I don't need all of this. So find readers and give yourself permission to trust them, but also give yourself permission to overrule them when they miss what's important to you. Here's the big thing, though. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but chances are, because you're an adult in the world, chances are you have probably told 1 or 2 lies in your life. If it makes a good lie, it makes a good story. Which is to say, think about what you would need to convince someone of something that isn't true. Right? If Mark and I are going to go out to lunch after this, and Mark wants to go to some restaurant, and I really hate that restaurant. And I don't feel like I know Mark well enough to say like, dude, that restaurant sucks. Like, but I don't want to go there. What do I have to do to convince him not to go there? Chances are I need to give 1 or 2 little details. You know, of, oh, last time I ate there, I got really sick. Last time I went there was, you know, I got in a car wreck, you know, whatever. I don't know. But I just need to convince him. I need to find 1 or 2 things that are going to convince him. I don't need a list of 20 things. I need 1 or 2 things that are going to convince him. Chances are, where you are in your writing project, you probably have 20 things. What you need to do now is figure out which of the 18 do you not need to convince the reader that this is what actually happened. And you can do that, but just think of it of like, what is the thing that I can say that is going to not make it where I have to put the other 18 things in there? If it makes a good lie, it's going to make a good story. Yeah.
When writing this story, how did you balance like your own like personal experience and input in like putting into the story while also still keeping the feeling of these being historical, like in the past kind of characters, and like kind of writing that kind of line of it?
Yeah. It wasn't so hard to keep. so hard to do the personal thing that you're asking about. What was hard was doing the research, kind of like what you were asking about. The hard thing was doing the research and figuring out what kind of research was going to be most meaningful to the reader, you know? And so, like, for instance, in that little short chunk that I read, you hear Roy mention that he's learning how to pick locks. So over the course of 10 years, I learned how to pick locks so that I could be convincing about it in the book. I know so much about lock picking at this point. If I had the right tools, I could probably get us into any room on campus right now. But I didn't need all of that to make the reader feel like Bret knows how to pick locks or Roy knows how to pick locks. It was more a matter of having so much information that I could choose, okay, this is going to make it feel personal to me so that the reader finds a place to connect with it, you know? So the personal stuff wasn't difficult. What was difficult was the external stuff making it feel personal, you know? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe just like one more question.
Okay.
2 more questions, maybe.
Okay.
Could you talk for a moment about the pros and cons of different kinds of publishing, like self-publishing, hybrid, trying to find an agent, those options?
So if you couldn't hear in the back, the question's about publishing. I mean, 20 years ago when I was in grad school, if you didn't have an agent in New York City, you didn't have a career. If you didn't have one of the big publishers behind you, you didn't have a career. One of the most amazing things that's happened over the last 20 years is that model has been obliterated. So if you have an agent and if you have a publishing contract with a big publishing house, chances are you're going to more immediately make more money. That's probably true. That doesn't mean that the book is in any way going to be more successful than a self-published book. You could make more money on a self-published book in the long run than you would with a big publishing house. The other thing that's changed is that you don't have to have a big publishing house behind you or an agent in New York to get attention in like newspapers and on the radio and things like that, because there's a much more level playing field now than there used to be, which means there are more visions and voices coming into this conversation than ever before. And that's invigorating for writers, but also for readers. If suddenly we have access to all these stories and books that we wouldn't have had access to 20 years ago. So in terms of pros and cons, there's lists of both. But at the end of the day, I think what it comes down to is there is a place and there are mechanisms to get stories out there that didn't exist even 5 years ago, you know, and that's a thrilling prospect. Yeah. Yes.
So with skateboarding,
Oh, great. Here we go. Finally, this is the last question.
I'm wondering why that inspires you. Is it like the people you're with? Is it the actual skateboarding? Or is it like you finally leave your house every once in a while?
I have a ramp in my backyard, so I rarely leave my house. I think that easy answer would be to say the community, but there's a larger answer as to why I love that community so much, and I think it might come down to a word like grit or resilience, tenacity. Of like if anybody in here skates or you know anybody who skates, if a skater, if you're a real skater, if you can't live without it and you're trying a trick, chances are you're not going to give up on that until you either do it or you get so wrecked that you can't try anymore. And I love that. I absolutely love it. There's a part of me when we're talking about writers, when we're talking about students, my writing, Mark's writing, your writing, anything. There's a part of me that I in a fundamental way, I don't understand why anybody quits anything. I don't understand it. When a student comes to me and says, this story isn't working, I've taken it through 10 drafts. I've been working on this thing for 2 years. I'm giving up on it. It's not going to work. I'm always a little bit like thunderstruck. Like, why? Why are you only giving this 2 years? Why are you only giving this 10 drafts? Like, why would you start something that you're not going to finish? And so that kind of grit, that kind of commitment to, I'm going to start something and I'm going to see it through, and I'm going to be surrounded by people who are as invested in it as I am. If you ever see a skateboarder like trying a trick and they're falling, watch them for 5 minutes. Chances are they're going to keep trying it. And I feel like if more people approach their lives that way, of like, once I decide that I'm going to do something, I'm going to keep trying it until I can't do it, meaning I'm physically unable to do it, or until it gets done. And that's an endless source of inspiration for me. And I want to be that person. I want to be the person who doesn't quit on a sentence, or the people I love, my students. If you come to me and say, I need this, I want this, and I say like, okay, we'll get it done, I want you to trust me. Yeah. Thank you.
So we're going to have free books here if you want to have a book, and Bret will be happy to sign it. We're just going to have a signing table. We usually start the line maybe like down this row so people can like leave the building if they want to, fire exits or whatever. Yeah, so if you want to just get in line here. Otherwise, thank you for coming.